Speedrunning Breath of the Wild is a lot like playing it for the first time. Exploring a newly discovered glitch or strategy gives the same sense of wonder and excitement that the game was designed to impart on new players traversing the world. In interviews with the developers leading up to the game's release, they stated that all the puzzles were designed to have multiple solutions, and that 10 different players could realize 10 different ways of playing the game. And one of those ways of playing is to beat each challenge as fast as humanly possible. For the past 6 years, runners have been grinding down times to shave off frames for each individual level. This is the history of Breath of the Wild IL World Records. Individual levels, or ILs for short, often have their own section on speedrunning leaderboards. For Breath of the Wild, this section not only houses all the unique shrines, but also contains the Divine Beast, the Trial of the Sword, and even the various time challenges across Hyrule, like the Shield Surfing minigame or Sandseal Racing. Now, covering each and every IL isn't feasible in one video, since there are well over 300 of them. So we will be focusing on the world record progression for just a handful of shrines, one from each of the 4 categories. But first, we should talk about the different IL categories. There's the classic any percent, a restricted variant called no major glitches, 100%, and finally, no major glitches 100%. To help illustrate the differences, I'll be showing the world record run for the shrine Moglatan in each category while explaining the various rule sets. For all categories, timing starts when you gain control of Link, and timing ends when you press A to interact with the pedestal. Shrines need to be completely untouched in order for a run to be considered valid. As you would expect, any percent ILs are extremely fast. Runners can utilize glitches like horse slides, wind bombs, and void out storage to complete shrines in just a few seconds. Next is no major glitches. This category, as the name suggests, bans most of the glitches that allow Link to zip straight to the end of the shrine. So no bullet time abuse, clipping through solid surfaces, or using the various effects of apparatus storage. Some examples of glitches that are allowed are wall jumps, glitchy ragdoll abuse, and stasis launching. Next is 100%. This category has 2 extra requirements: open all chests in the shrine, obtaining the items within, and defeating all enemies. Since nothing is banned in this category, interesting routing often emerges around trying to quickly move from point to point while dealing with the constraints of the shrine's architecture. I will be editing out the chest opening animations for all runs, so you will see some noticeable cuts. Since it's 5 seconds long, it adds up pretty quickly. The last category is no major glitches 100%. This category is simply a combination of the previous 2, requiring the player to open all chests and defeat all enemies while not using any game-breaking glitches. As you can imagine, this category is slower due to the number of restrictions when compared to its glitchy counterpart, but the saying, "limitations foster creativity," holds true when it comes to no major glitches. Something to note about both of the no major glitches categories is that they did not exist when ILs were initially added to the leaderboard. Over time, as more glitches were discovered, the interest for having separate categories grew, and they were eventually added. Many runs that occurred early on, or before the discovery of certain tricks or strategies, still qualify as no major glitches. As you might have already noticed, almost every IL runner makes use of the food or elixir effect Speed Up 3 to increase Link's base movement speed. Lastly, Breath of the Wild runs at 30 frames per second, which means a single frame is approximately 33 milliseconds, and is the smallest amount of time a world record can be improved. With all that out of the way, let's talk about our first shrine. Ruta O is a shrine whose main focus is the core that rotates 90 degrees back and forth whenever its switch is activated. It has 2 chests and 0 enemies. One of the ways to play this shrine is to actually ride the core as it rotates, which bypasses the locked door and completely skips having to use the orb to activate the rising block. This is the history of Ruta O No Major Glitches 100%. All the way back in 2017, a runner by the name of Lulucore submitted one of the first runs of Ruta O 100%. Since not many glitches were known at the time, this also makes it the first No Major Glitches 100% run as well. After hopping in the cage intended for the orb and grabbing the upper chest, Lulucore dropped down to get the lower chest and did one more lap to finish the shrine. The routing wasn't the most optimal, but it was a good baseline for showing how the centerpiece of the shrine could be used for quick traversal. Signified broke the record shortly after with a slight change in routing. They went for the lower chest first, and used magnesis from below to access the upper chest. Then, they hopped into the cage intended for the orb, like Lulucore did, to access the top level of the shrine. After dropping a remote bomb near the switch, they ran towards the monk and finished with a time of 32.8 seconds. This run's routing was improved, needing to only ride in the cage once, and since Signified used a remote bomb to activate the switch for the final rotation, they could quickly sprint to the monk without stopping. Later that year, Win Button 43 came in with a new strategy, which saved just enough time for them to take the record. The run starts the same as Signified's, getting the lower chest first and using magnesis to access the upper chest. But instead of running all the way over to the cage to ride the core when it rotates, they simply stood on a small lip near the ground, which is enough for Link to ride the core to the top. Almost a year and a half later, 4 AL speedrunners decided to race Ruta O, and during the race, Yoshi runs set a new world record. Instead of getting the lower chest first, which is bolted to the ground, Yoshi knew it'd be faster to simply bomb arrow the upper chest down to the lower, opening both side by side. Then, activating the remote bomb they threw towards the beginning, they rotated the core to get lifted straight to the monk. This run was a massive improvement of 8 seconds over the previous world record. What happened next was a series of incremental improvements by various runners. The route was set, it was just a matter of how fast a player could execute. First, Kamali came in with a 22.5. With his tighter movement, he was able to secure a new world record by about 1.5 seconds. This record stood for a while and set the bar high for future runners attempting to break it. But a year and a half later, Power Gamer Kai submitted a run that shaved off a single frame over Kamali's run. One micro-optimization Kai added was using a bow with low durability that broke on the last arrow shot, skipping the put-away animation of the bow. But then, later that year, a runner by the name of Solus got a sub-22, saving half a second over the previous world record, due in part to the large boost by the core at the end. And that is where the record stands today. Shaiuto, the Seesaw Shrine, contains 2 chests and 0 enemies. The first chest is located to the right within easy reach of just about any player. By using stasis on a seesaw, a player can easily run up it as if it were a ramp. The second chest, however, is not so straightforward. Located high up on a ledge, speedrunners have found multiple creative ways to reach this chest. This is the history of Shaiuto 100%. As it turns out, using stasis on the seesaws isn't always necessary. Showcased right away in the first submitted run by Signified, it's possible to do a well-timed shield jump as Link crosses the middle point to reach the level above. Utilizing magnesis, Signified brought the first chest to them and skipped the second seesaw entirely. In what I imagine to be the developer's first intentionally designed solution, Signified used the metal chest and gravity to launch themselves up to the second chest using the seesaw. Then, they used stasis on the last seesaw to get to the monk, finishing with a time of 45 seconds. Nearly 2 years later, after the famous moon jump glitch was discovered, a runner by the name of Timeshift decided to give Shaiuto 100% a try. In short, moonjump is a glitch that requires a lengthy setup, but once achieved, it puts Link in a state that allows for infinite jumps. Timeshift saved over 13 seconds by being able to just jump straight to both chests. This run wasn't perfect though. Their lines weren't clean, their use of stasis seemed slow and not necessary with moonjump active, and while moonjump is good for gaining height anywhere, it's possible to jump more than needed, requiring Link to fall back down, which can lose some time. A year later, Kamali did the unthinkable. He beat Timeshift without using moonjump, without using any major glitches. This run was just pure movement. Perfectly timed jumps off the first 2 seesaws to get to the first chest. A clean shield jump to make it across the gap. Quick menuing, and then a frame-perfect shield jump to gain just enough height off the top of the stasis seesaw to reach the second chest. An amazing run that was over 1 second faster than the previous record. Over a year later, Cephala decided that a run with the wind bomb just had to be faster than one with clean movement. In short, a wind bomb is a trick that uses the bullet time mechanic where you explode one bomb into another bomb into Link, propelling him at high speeds. Cephala did a well-timed wind bomb to reach the second chest quickly, and then used the hold smuggle glitch right above the chest. This glitch resets Link's speed to 0 by going into the inventory and holding an item. Surprisingly, this was only half a second faster than Kamali's run, which still stands as the No Major Glitches 100% world record today. Just 2 months after Cephala's run, Lulucore decided to break the record with an optimized moonjump run. Having perfect lines, moonjumping only when needed, they beat Cephala's run by 0.4 seconds. This run had very few mistakes. Clean movement, fast interact prompts, overall, a near perfect moonjump run. And then, while making this video, I thought, wait, I could probably beat that with a faster wind bomb. And so I did. It's a little weird to describe a run I just did recently. It's not a perfect run. I wasted time lining up the wind bomb and was in bullet time for a while. I used the scope to line up the wind bomb since it just barely threads the needle between the monk, the wall, and the overhang above. Using the scope to set Link's angle is great for precision, but often takes longer than throw aiming. I also accidentally jumped after landing in front of the second chest, which lost some time. I expected this run to be beaten fairly quickly, and in all honesty, I was kinda hoping someone would get the first sub 30-second time before I finished making this video. Less than a week later, it was none other than Solus who set a new world record. They used the same route as me, but saved time by using throw aim to line up Link and not staying in bullet time as long during the wind bomb. These optimizations saved over 2 seconds over my run, finishing with a time of 28.167, and that is where the record stands today. Who knew this shrine, tucked away in a cave in the Farron region, could have so many ways to play it? Bosch Kala is the most popular no major glitches IL, and the reason it's the most popular is not because of some crazy routing or strats, but because it's a meme. In a way, it's the unofficial 5th tutorial shrine, showing the player how wind interacts with the recently acquired paraglider. This is the history of Bosch Kala no major glitches. This IL is a major test of movement. You already know it's all about getting there on the perfect line. I'll actually be skipping over a lot of runs due to most of them being nearly indistinguishable from one another. One of the oldest runs is from Pretends to Know, and it's the first sub 15-second time. To give some context, the current world record is less than 2 seconds faster. In late 2020, the meme began to hit its peak, with multiple world records being set over the span of just a few weeks. First, a 14.233 by Unexpected Mew. Then, a 13.933 by Mikey. Mikey cut the corner early on, which was different from Mew's run, but to be honest, most of the improvements made during this time are very subtle, in contrast to the various outfits runners wear, which are not so subtle. Soon after, Xerath got a 13.867, which was only a 2-frame improvement over Mikey's run. This run was later tied by both Roko and Let Me Think of a Username. A 3-way tie caused the meme to slow down a bit, as runners struggled to find ways to improve the time. But speedrunners always find a way, and continuing on into 2021, both Alexander Hyperbeam and Xerath got a 13.833 on the same day in April. Each runner was able to save those 33 milliseconds with just better lines. I mean, look at this movement. Later in 2021, Aqua broke the record again just by 1 frame. But this time it was a little different. They started off with a shield jump to gain extra height, which was enough to not have to drop down and run over to the second fan. Instead, they just glided right into the airstream. Over a year later, both Fischl and Thorium broke the record with a tie of 13.733. Both players opted to not unequip their shield after the first jump, and did a quick shield surf to get into the airstream. Saving 2 frames over the previous record, these runs took place only a day apart from each other and used the same exact route, and that is where the record stands today. Eventide Island is located in the southeast corner of the map, and as soon as Link sets foot anywhere on the island, a quest is presented by the monk of the Kugu-Chide Shrine. He challenges Link to set aside his equipment and place the 3 orbs in the respective altars, using only his wits and whatever he can scavenge from the island. Most players despise this shrine after first arriving and losing all their gear. But over time, Eventide is often regarded as one of the best shrines in the game. This is the history of Stranded on Eventide Any %. The rules for this IL are a little different, since the shrine is the reward and the island before it is the challenge. Timing starts when you gain control of Link after the cutscene that removes all of your weapons and items, and timing ends when you activate the pedestal to open the shrine door. The island must be completely untouched before starting, and lastly, dropping items before triggering the initial cutscene, only to pick them up afterwards, is not allowed. The first person to submit a run for Eventide was Boogie Bunny, and they did so about a year after the game's release. This run doesn't use any glitches, but the general route in terms of which orb to tackle first is still the same today. Boogie Bunny landed right next to the first orb and ran around the forest to the altar off the coast. After throwing the orb in the water, they used Cryonis to lift the orb up to the altar, in what I can only describe as the quintessential Eventide experience. Boogie Bunny pushed forward and eventually placed the orb in the altar. Next, they ran along the beach, grabbing a boat oar along the way, and headed towards the Hinox, who wears the second orb around their neck. They didn't go straight to the second orb though. First, they made a quick pit stop to the base of the mountain and used Urbosa's Fury to kill the bokoblins camping out at the top, where the second altar is located. Then, they glided over and quietly snatched the second orb to avoid fighting the Hinox. While being chased by the recently awakened Cyclops, Boogie Bunny did the last long running section of the run by taking the path up the back of the mountain. They used the boat oar to clear away the boxes obscuring the altar, and placed the orb down. Afterwards, they used stasis on a boulder to quickly launch themselves to the final enemy camp. This strat looks really cool, and it's decently fast, but funnily enough, it isn't used in any future world record runs. After using one last Urbosa's Fury to clear out the camp, they grabbed the last orb and used stasis on the slab covering the altar and completed the monk's challenge. But as I mentioned, the IL doesn't end until the shrine's pedestal is activated, so you need to wait for the cutscene of the shrine rising out of the ground and the cutscene of the monk returning your items to finish. After that, Boogie Bunny used Revali's Gale and ran to the shrine to complete the run with a time of 4 minutes, 5 seconds. This was a pretty good glitchless run, but there is still plenty of time to save. Less than 2 weeks later, Yang broke the record by over 30 seconds with another glitchless run. Right away, the first change he made was to take a more direct line to the beach. This saved a decent chunk of time since a good amount of ground needed to be covered. He also didn't struggle nearly as much getting the orb out of the water, and was able to quickly use Cryonis to get the orb up and in. The next major deviation from Boogie's run is that Yang skipped the boat orb and ran straight towards the second orb. He climbed the large tree nearby so he could glide on top of the Hinox to grab it. Then Yang beautifully executed a new innovative strat to quickly get the orb to its altar. They used stasis and a bomb to launch the orb to the top of the mountain and climb straight up the front of it. This strat requires a good deal of precision. If the bomb is too close to the orb, it won't have enough forward momentum to reach the top, and too far, it will overshoot and land in the sea. They didn't do the boulder launch that Boogie did, instead opting for a more consistent gale. This skipped having to use an Urbosa's Fury to clear out the camp, and waiting for the stasis timer to run out. The rest of the run is pretty straightforward, with one notable change being that Yang decided to combine an Urbosa's Fury with moving the slab off the altar, which saved a small amount of time. Yang finished with a time of 3 minutes 34 seconds, a record that would stand uncontested for over 2 years. In late 2020, I decided that running Eventide would be a fun change of pace from grinding full game runs. A lot had changed though. Wind bombs and other glitches were common knowledge, which allowed for new and faster routing. The first thing I did was grab the bow from the chest at the start and collect an arrow from one of the bokos so I could wind bomb later. I ran to the first altar and used cryo to get the orb in. After that came the first big change in routing. I wind bombed to the Hinox instead of running along the beach, which saved a lot of time. I stole the second orb from the Hinox, and after fumbling around in the rune menu, I used Yang's stasis strat to get the ball to the top of the mountain. I ended up finding my own setup for the stasis strat as I had a hard time replicating Yang's setup. After a quick run up and reaching the top of the mountain, I had a very one-sided chat with one of the bokos while picking up the orb, after which I placed the second orb in its altar. I wind bombed to the last enemy camp, saving another good chunk of time over using the stasis launch or Revali's Gale. The ending of the run remained unchanged though. But with the 2 wind bombs I routed in, I was able to beat the long-standing world record by over 17 seconds. But this was just the first run I completed with my new route. I knew it was capable of more, so I continued on grinding and seeing what I could come up with. A couple of months later, in January of 2021, I set a new world record. It was a very small improvement of only 2 seconds. To be quite honest, there is not much to note about this run, since it used the same exact route. I did switch my game's language to Japanese because it makes the last cutscene slightly faster, and I started doing the stasis strat farther from the mountain so I didn't have to carry the orb as far. As difficult as this strat is, it is pretty satisfying watching the orb hit the perfect arc to the top of the mountain. I had a pretty good wind bomb to the last enemy camp, and I definitely didn't waste 5 seconds near the end of the run trying to place the final orb in the altar. I ended up finishing with a time of 3 minutes 15 seconds, and after this run, I decided to take a break from Eventide to focus on other categories. Unbeknownst to me, a runner by the name of Danklin27 started grinding Eventide at around the same time. Over the course of the next month and a half, Danklin would lower his PB bit by bit, and then, in late February, as if willing it into existence, Danklin said this at the beginning of a run.
It's just a matter of time.
He opted to kill the guard Boko for arrows instead of waiting for the Bokos to miss and picking one up that way. Either way, there's randomness involved, but this way was faster since he could grab the Boko's bow along with the arrows, which saved time over opening the chest. Danklin had a quick first orb, doing a swaggy little kick to get it onto the altar. His menuing was a little slow, but after a good first wind bomb, Danklin approached the Hinox. He decided not to go for the stasis strat on the second orb, and simply took the regular path up the mountain. This is about 5 seconds slower, but considering the stasis strat killed a majority of my runs, it wasn't a bad call. Danklin did use Urbosa's Fury, and strangely used Magnesis on both boxes instead of a single bomb, which did lose a little bit of time. But with a clean wind bomb to the last orb, and skipping the last Urbosa's Fury entirely, Danklin was able to avoid all the enemies at the last camp and set a new world record. He finished with a time of 3 minutes 10 seconds, a 5-second improvement over my record, starting an intense rivalry. Excited by the competition, I set my sights on getting the first sub 3 minute time. I figured if I combined Danklin's strat of killing the guard Boko for the bow and arrows with the second orb stasis strat, I should be able to take it back. 2 weeks later, I was on a run that had the potential to be sub 3 minutes. I had a pretty fast first orb with no major mistakes, then a decent wind bomb to the Hinox. My stasis launch on the second orb was good enough to get it to the top of the mountain, and this time I didn't have issues avoiding the enemies. Knowing I was on decent pace, my wind bomb to the last orb was a little off due to nerves. But thankfully it was still good enough to get me there, only losing a little bit of time. My heart skipped a beat when I accidentally hit the third orb while moving the slab, but it stayed close by. I ended up finishing with a time of 3 minutes 3 seconds. Just shy of my goal, but a new world record nonetheless. Undeterred, I continued grinding. I knew this route was capable of getting a sub 3, I just needed good execution. 5 days later, I was on a run with good pace. The run started almost identical to the last, placing the first orb in the altar within 1 second of my personal best. Then I had a fast wind bomb to the Hinox. A small optimization I implemented in this run was to not unstasis the second orb, but simply let the timer run out. Since I needed to run up the mountain anyway, I saved a little bit of time by avoiding some unnecessary menuing. To my surprise, I actually placed the second orb in the altar 4 seconds faster than my best segment, meaning I was on pace to get a sub 3. Like most runs that make it past the second orb, I started getting nervous. I lost a bit of time wind bombing to the last orb and had some bad menuing. I was only a couple seconds ahead after setting down the third orb, meaning I couldn't make any mistakes on the way to the shrine. And then I tried to push jump like on frame 1 there. Okay, I think that was sub 3. I think I split late there. I think that was it. I think we got it. I did it. After retiming the run, I had finally achieved my goal of a 2 minute 59 second time. Where's this guy's head? The first shot I missed, the second one went right through his head. A new world record, and while it wasn't a perfect run, the route was approaching its limit. I decided to do some research into ways I can improve the route to save more time. The first option I wanted to explore was a way to wind bomb from the first enemy camp to the first altar. The only reason we walked in the first place was because using stasis on the first orb caused it to land in the forest. But during a testing livestream in early April 2021, I successfully completed the first Orb 1 launch that landed close enough to the altar to prove the strat was viable. I continued on looking for other routing improvements. After watching Danklin's runs, I realized how little time the second orb stasis strat actually saved. The risk was high and the reward was relatively small. I decided to revisit a strat I looked into a few times in the past. The idea was to basically just run straight up the front of the mountain while carrying the orb. And after many failed attempts, that was without a doubt the most Sisyphean thing I've ever done. I found a path of terrain that allowed Link to run up the front of the mountain without losing his footing. The white whale of routing improvements was to find a way to skip the last cutscene. You see, the player has control of Link for 1 frame after the cutscene of the shrine rising out of the ground, but before the cutscene of the monk returning your items. My theory was, it's possible to activate the shrine's pedestal in that 1 frame. During another testing livestream, I successfully proved my theory by completing the first cutscene skip. Alright, here we go. You heard it! You heard it! I hit it! That was it! All I had to do was route it in. First, stasis the orb directly above the altar. Second, use Revali's Gale off to the side so it wouldn't affect the orb. Third, do a mid-air wind bomb, followed by a hold smuggle to stop right where the shrine will appear. Once stasis ends, the orb falls into the altar, and I just had to hit the A press on that 1 frame to finish the run before the last cutscene. If I could pull it off, it would save about 17 seconds. 3 days later, before I had a chance to complete a run with my various new discoveries, Danklin submitted a new run to the leaderboard. And it started with an Orb 1 launch. He had a good wind bomb to the first altar, and the landing of the orb was pretty good. It was within throwing distance of just using 1 cryo block, which saved a lot of time. After quickly putting the orb in its place, he had another good wind bomb to the Hinox. But he opted to go for a much more consistent side mountain climb for the second orb. This path up the mountain, while a couple of seconds slower, had a near 100% success rate when compared to the front mountain climb I discovered recently, which was nowhere close to that. These strats alone were more than enough to get a world record, so Danklin played the ending of the run safe and didn't attempt the cutscene skip with a difficult mid-air wind bomb. And with no major mistakes putting the last orb in its altar, he got the first world record using the new first orb launch strat, finishing with a time of 2 minutes, 53 seconds. I was very surprised to see my previous record of 2:59 beaten, especially with a run using one of my own recently discovered strats. But it motivated me even more to get a run where I hit all the new tricks. 2 days later, on April 20th, I was on a run that got off to a shaky start. I started bombing this Boko's treehouse since he would often shoot Link or the orb during the setup for the launch. Ironically, while placing the square bomb, I was shot off the platform by one of the Bokos from behind. I continued on anyway, mainly just to see where the ball landed, and to my surprise, it was within 1 cryo block right next to the altar. I had a bad angle when wind bombing to the Hinox, but I was able to pull off a super wind bomb, which is done by intentionally lagging the game via pausing, then opening the paraglider as the lag ends. Since supers are faster than regular wind bombs, I was able to make up some time. I nailed the mountain climb up to the second altar, and had a great wind bomb to the final orb. After hitting the first 2 new tricks, I decided to play it safe, and used a Fury to clear out the last camp so I didn't have to worry about getting hit when setting up for the cutscene skip. After moving the slab, I carefully lined up the orb above the altar and stasised it. I used Revali's Gale, executed the tense midair, had a well-timed hold smuggle, then using a visual cue based on the ground's texture I got into position. I had multiple runs fail the mid-air wind bomb, and every other run that got to this point didn't hit the A press. All that was left to do was mash the A button like crazy, and I just had to hope I hit the 1 frame I needed to. At last, I finally did it. I completed a run with my ideal route, setting a new world record by over 10 seconds. I took a bit of time to celebrate this achievement. and I was happy I was able to prove to myself that it was actually possible to hit all the new difficult tricks in a single run. But due to the number of mistakes early on, I wasn't satisfied. I was committed to getting the run. I continued grinding over the next couple of days, and then on April 23rd, 2021, I decided to load up Breath of the Wild, put on a Daft Punk playlist, and started a session of Stranded on Eventide 90% world record attempts. There's something I didn't mention before about the Holtzmogel glitch, and it's that it needs to be set up after each resetted attempt. This added quite a bit of extra time to each run, especially because I was using an older and slower method to store the Holtzmogel. The setup involves holding an item while standing in deep water, and then fast traveling on the same frame Link takes damage from a bomb. Since this method is frame perfect, it can take a couple of tries to get right. Now I know what you're thinking. All that complicated setup before every attempt just for one glitch? But that one glitch saved 17 seconds. And like I said, I was committed. In hindsight, I'm actually glad I used this older setup, as it gave me a lot of practice doing mid-airs on the way to the island, which I sorely needed. It's hard to put into words how difficult the tricks in this run really are. The Orb 1 launch itself requires a near pixel perfect position and angle, and it was the cause of most of my resets. So I got really good at setting up Holtzmogel and doing mid-airs. The mountain climb is an incredibly frustrating trick to fail, which required me to practice it way more than I would have liked. Hitting those two tricks and getting a run all the way to the end, only to fail the mid-air or miss the Holtzmogel, and not even have a chance to hit that one frame A press was devastating. Another thing I didn't talk about when explaining the cutscene skip is that half the time, the interact prompt doesn't even appear on screen for that one frame, which makes the run unverifiable. But I didn't give up. I stayed on the grind, kept getting better, knowing any day I would get a run that was faster. Once I reached the island, I landed on top of the Boko's treehouse, loaded up Live Split during the initial cutscene, and mentally prepared to start my first run of the day. People often commented on how bored I must be having to watch this initial cutscene before each run. And while there was definitely some truth to that, I used this time to reflect on how previous runs died and reviewed what I was going to do in the next one. Since this was the first run of the day, I planned on doing a no reset just to make sure I was warmed up for all the hard tricks. I remember sometimes if a run died to the mountain run up, I would just practice it over and over until I hit it 10 times in a row. I bombed the guard Boko and lined up the orb for the first launch. Since I routed in the Holtzmogel, I needed to make sure I actually picked up an item at some point in the run that I could hold at the very end. Thankfully that barrel next to the orb usually has a choo-choo in it that dies to the bomb, so I can just pick up its jelly. I had pretty average arrow luck this run, but I did have a good first wind bomb. As I approached the first altar, I struggled to see where the orb landed, but then I noticed it landed on the altar itself, which only happened a handful of times before this. I remember sitting up in my chair thinking, wow, this could be a good run. I then immediately flubbed the super inputs on the second wind bomb, which lost a little bit of time. But I wasn't worried, since I was still on a good line. I quickly dropped down in the air without wasting too much time pumping the glider, and grabbed the second orb from the Hinox. As I approached the mountain, I noticed I was on a better pace for this part of the run than I was expecting, despite the missed super. I nailed the run up, and placed the orb in its altar, tying my best ever second orb segment. This was when my palms started to get sweaty. I had a bad angled wind bomb to the third orb, and my menuing to switch to stasis was a little slow. I stopped using an Urbosa's Fury at the last camp and just kind of hoped that none of the enemies would notice me while I set up the cutscene skip. I moved the slab and then let muscle memory take over. I galed. I hit the midair, then I hit the hold smuggle. It all came down to mashing A as fast as I could and hoping I hit the 1 frame window to activate the pedestal. And then I fucking did it. One more time I broke the record, finishing eventide in 2 minutes and 23 seconds. And all that was left to do was to celebrate. I guess I should note that I typically had my mic muted when doing offline runs, but I think my in-game pop-off does a good job of capturing my emotions in the moment. And that is where the record stands today. Breath of the Wild was designed from the ground up to be played by everyone, however they want. And in just 6 years, speedrunners have found so many innovative ways to play it. Looking forward, I expect most runners to be busy finding new ways to play the sequel. But I have no doubt that this game's speedrunning scene will continue on, with new records from runners both old and new. And I'm excited to see where it goes. This has been the history of Breath of the Wild IL World Records so far. Thanks for watching.